Well, I think at this point, clearly the conviction and the charge upon which his conviction is based has been declared by a U.S. federal court to be an invalid charge. We're going to have to wait and see what the government does, whether it appeals or not, to the U.S. Supreme Court before any next decision can be made on what his lawyers decide to do for him.
Didn't he agree as part of his plea deal not to challenge or lodge any appeals? Doesn't that preclude him from seeking a similar ruling?
Well, part of this is, he didn't have to seek this. It was done by someone else. There's only 3 people that were actually convicted under the Military Commission Act of 2006. Hamdan, who was this case involved in finding the charge invalid. Hicks, he was only convicted of this material support for terrorism offense. And then a third person who's convicted of some other offenses. But clearly the precedent of this federal court decision is that the conviction for which he was held responsible at Guantanamo is not a valid charge.
But when you say he might not have to appeal, what are you envisaging as a possible scenario that could see his conviction quashed?
Well, unfortunately, this has never been done before, right? These military commissions haven't been used in 60 years. So the fact that the U.S. Appeals Court has found it invalid should automatically invalidate the 2 convictions also dealing with other people for this offense. There really shouldn't necessarily be anything practical that needs to be done. Really, the question is why he was left there to be tried in a system that there were so many warnings and so many people complaining about was not a proper charge. But
just to clarify, you disagree with the U.S. military prosecutor Morris Davis, who you went up against in the Guantanamo Bay Commission, who says that David Hicks now faces a catch-22 given he waived his right to challenge the conviction.
Oh, absolutely. Look, everything that dealt with that plea agreement was just a matter of, the goal was getting David out. He had no real decisions down there at Guantanamo. He was basically told, if you sign this, you can go home to Australia in 60 days. That was it. There was no decision for him. He needed to get out of there. He'd been held for almost over 5 years in an unfair system, being tried before a system that violated the Geneva Conventions and was based on made-up charges. In today's decision only validates our concern for the invalidity of the whole system. Mo Davis was with the same person who was praising this charge and saying it was a valid offense, 7 years ago, has now switched horses now that he's on the losing side.
Many in Australia would still have problems with the activities that David Hicks engaged in. Are we seeing him cleared or potentially cleared in legal terms, but not so in moral terms?
Well, he's written a book about what he did. People need to read it, judge for themselves on the moral side. I don't think anyone's ever stood up and said he's made the best life choices in doing what he did. For me as a lawyer and looking how U.S. stood up for its citizens and the British government stood up for British citizens and found this system inappropriate for their citizens, I just didn't think it was appropriate for an Australian citizen to go through a made-up system of a made-up charge, and this has just confirmed that concern of mine.
Can we expect the US government, you alluded to this a bit earlier in the interview, but can we expect the US government to lodge an appeal in the Supreme Court?
Well, I think they're going to have to make a decision. There's only a few cases that deal with the Military Commission Act of 2006, so whether or not they will tactically do that, I don't know. There is a similar offense under the Military Commission Act of 2009 that came into power after Obama was elected president and made changes to it. There is a similar type of offense, so I think they're going to be going back, studying both of the acts to determine whether they need to appeal or whether just they need to move on and operate under the 2009 Act.
Because there could be implications here, couldn't there, for trials against some of the bigger fish, some of the key detainees like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed?
Absolutely. I mean, and that's the real concern is you've got some people now who's actually accused of doing some serious harm to the United States and Australians and being responsible for September 11th is serious allegations that need to be held accountable in a fair and just system. And right now, this raises the question of the validity of some of the charges, especially when you're looking at applying the Military Commission Act to conduct that occurred before it was created, and you deal with that whole retrospective issue.
You've been critical of the former government for not standing up for David Hicks like the British government did with its citizens Tony Abbott today, the opposition leader, was asked about it, says this is a matter for the US legal system to manage. What do you make of that?
Well, look, I didn't go back to the 5 years when this was going on. It didn't bother me that the Australian government didn't listen to the defence lawyers. I expect them to dismiss them. But when you have the Law Council of Australia, you have experts throughout Australia that are saying this charge is retrospective and is not valid, and you've got the former Judge Advocate General for the Australian Defence Forces telling them this, and they ignore it. That seems to be a problem, a systematic problem. And now it's just been confirmed again by the U.S. government or the U.S. appellate court system. I don't think you can just wash your hands of responsibilities to your system, to your citizens. U.S. doesn't do it, and neither does the UK.
Finally, what do you think David Hicks' response will be to this? Has he simply moved on, or will this provide some vindication for him?
Look, as a lawyer, sometimes you're a little bit detached because you're not the person, the subject of what's going on. I think for himself, his family that have, been subjected to this unfair process, you need some recognition that he was treated unfairly, and I think this is a step in that right direction. What actions he can take and what other things he needs to really put closure to this is going to be up to him and is the people supporting him.
Dan Mori, I appreciate your time today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.